So, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I am reviewing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. But before I do that, I should say what's at the start of every podcast I do, and that is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello there to my viewers, but you prefer to listen to podcasts, well, you can with this one at Night of the Movies on Spotify, and if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check this podcast out visually on my YouTube channel and Night of the Movies on that platform too. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and leave me some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there's always things to improve on, and feedback is much appreciated. Also, I should say, and people who've been following my channel over the past couple of weeks will have a good guess as to what I'm going to say here. It is still the ongoing saga of hay fever. Yes, I've still got hay fever right now, and if I'm sniffling throughout this podcast, I apologise. If it's a bit bummed up in this podcast, I apologise. And I'm not in top form either, because that's what hay fever does to you. And I also went swimming earlier today, and when I go swimming, I get this thing I like to call fuzzy thinking, where it's something that going swimming does to you. It just makes you think weirdly for the rest of the day. So, yeah, I'm not in top form, and blame hay fever and the fact that I went swimming for that. But other than that, this should be a great and fun podcast to listen to and or watch. So, let's get into it. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which is the longest name for a film ever. So, this is the new Mission Impossible movie. It's the 7th Mission Impossible film, and over the past week, I have been watching all the Mission Impossible movies, so I'm rewatching as well, because I had seen Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, and Mission Impossible Fallout, but I'd seen them a long time ago. So when I was watching them over the last week, it was like I was watching for the first time, because I didn't really remember much about them. Like, in the case of Mission Impossible Fallout, all I really remembered was a whole helicopter sequence in the climax of that movie. In Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, I remember the bike chase and the opera house sequence, and in Ghost Protocol, I remember the sequence that took place, the fight sequence that took place on the cars. I didn't really remember much about those movies. So watching them last week was like I was watching for the first time. But I hadn't actually seen the first Mission Impossible, Mission Impossible 2, and Mission Impossible 3 before though. So I was watching them for the first time, and I loved the first Mission Impossible film. That's by Brian De Palma. It's so good. And Mission Impossible 2 I enjoyed. I mean, it's a bit weird, but I kind of liked it. And Mission Impossible 3, I can't even speak. Mission Impossible 3 I absolutely loved. That was one directed by J.J. Abrams, and one of the things I really loved about that movie is how, in its directing, it was like J.J. Abrams was excited to make a Mission Impossible film. Just through his camera movements, from the way the camera was always moving, the way that there was never really a dull moment in that movie. You know, Mission Impossible 2 has a couple of dull moments. Mission Impossible 3 is like, remember those dull moments from Mission Impossible 2? Well, they're not here now. So, I've been watching all the previous 6 Mission Impossible movies leading up to this one, and I was very excited to see it. And with this movie, you've obviously got Tom Cruise returning as Ethan Hunt. He's in all the Mission Impossible films. And as well, you've got Ving Rhames, I think that's what his name is, Ving Rhames, returning as Luther, who has a role in all previous Mission Impossible films as well. He's in one scene in the 4th Mission Impossible film, Ghost Protocol. But he is in it, so he's in all the previous Mission Impossible movies. You have Simon Pegg returning. He first appeared in Mission Impossible 3, and he's been in all of them since then. You got Rebecca Ferguson returning. She first came into the franchise with Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. She was in Mission Impossible Fallout, and she's back in this one. Vanessa Kirby is back. She was previously in Mission Impossible Fallout. And you also have the new addition of Hayley Atwell. And on top of all that, you got Christopher McQuarrie returning to direct another Mission Impossible film. The first Mission Impossible movie. How many times am I going to say Mission Impossible in this review today? I don't know. I'm going to say it about 1,000,000 times. So I'll just let you guys know, because I've already said it about 20 times. But anyway, you got Christopher McQuarrie returning to direct yet another Mission Impossible film. He directed Rogue Nation, he directed Fallout, and he's back to directing this one. And as far as I know, he's directing the next one as well, because this is part 1, and it'd be a bit weird if he didn't direct part 2. So yeah, you got Christopher McQuarrie directing another Mission Impossible film, and all that got me really excited. The trailers look great. You saw Tom Cruise doing all this fantastic, this mind-blowing stunt in the trailer, and I have been really looking forward to this movie, and having watched the previous 6 Mission Impossible films over the last week, I've been getting more and more excited for it. And I'm not going to give a plot synopsis in this one. I'm just going to go straight into my opinion. I really liked this film. I had a great time watching it. It felt like a proper blockbuster. You know what I mean? Like, I've enjoyed some blockbusters recently. I don't care what anyone says. I really liked Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I actually ended up really enjoying that movie, and I'm really happy that I did. But there were some people who didn't, and there have been some blockbusters recently which have disappointed me in varying ways. But this new Mission Impossible film, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which again is the longest name for a film ever, but Dead Reckoning Part 1 feels like a proper blockbuster. It is an immense film to watch, and I got to see in IMAX, which I don't usually do in movies. I don't usually watch films in IMAX just because there's no IMAX cinemas really near me, but I travelled a bit to go and watch this one in IMAX with my mates, and guess what? I am so damn happy that I did, because the cinematic experience in itself was on another level. Every single time there was an intense sequence going on, the cinema felt like it was rumbling. I was like, oh my god, this is so intense, it's so suspenseful, and it wouldn't be if I was just watching this in a 2D screen. So I was so glad that I saw it in IMAX, and if I get the chance, I'll watch every film in IMAX. I'm tempted to go and watch Oppenheimer in IMAX now, because that comes out pretty soon as well. So yeah, you get the point. I loved watching this film in IMAX, and I loved so many of the action sequences in this movie. My favourite sequence in this film is the climactic train fight sequence, which I think might be the most intense. Yeah, it might be the most intense watching experience I've ever had in a cinema ever, watching that train sequence. And it goes on for about 40 minutes, and the intensity in that sequence and the suspense of how it's all built up is never let down during that whole 40 minutes. It is thrilling on another level, and if you haven't guessed already, that is when Tom Cruise, as Ethan Hunt, does that big epic stunt that you've seen in the trailers. And I love seeing Tom Cruise back. He gives a great performance as Ethan Hunt once again. And Rebecca Ferguson's great in this film. So is Simon Pegg. Simon Pegg probably his best performance that you've seen him do in the Mission Impossible franchise. Seeing the whole crew back together, Ethan Hunt's crew, that's all great. And yeah, there's so many really fantastic moments in this movie. And I really, really liked Christopher McQuarrie's direction as well. Because even so I've liked his directing in the previous 2 Mission Impossible films he's directed, he's done a great job helming these big action set pieces, and yet bringing everything down to this human story, just through the directing, just through the storytelling. Even though he's done a great job in the past, I do think this is the best directed of all of his Mission Impossible films. I think it's better directed than Rogue Nation, better directed than Fallout, because there's a visual style in this film which I found really engaging, and I really, really, really liked that. However, I don't think it's one of the best Mission Impossible movies, and nor do I love it. There are some Mission Impossible films which I do love. I love Mission Impossible 3. And I loved the first Mission Impossible movie, and I loved Fallout, and you know what? Yeah, I even loved Rogue Nation. And so yeah, there are some Mission Impossible films which I absolutely love. But I didn't love this one. And I think the reason I didn't love this movie is what I've said in the title of this podcast. It's an immense blockbuster, and it really is, and you really feel that, especially when you're watching IMAX. But it's an immense blockbuster that needed more acceleration. And what I mean by that is it just needed to be a bit more exciting for me, really. You know, there's so much plot going on in this film and so much laying the ground because, you know, it is a part one in the end. And it feels very much like a complete movie, but still it's a part one. So there's so much plotting going on, so much laying this story down, getting to know these characters, and I liked all that. But my favourite Mission Impossible movies is when you are in instantly and it doesn't stop moving. Yes, you'll have dialogue sequences and characters talking and all that stuff, but it doesn't stop going. It's just constantly moving. That's what Fallout was like, although Fallout took a bit of time to get going, but Fallout was constantly moving. Mission Impossible 3 was constantly moving. There was an excitement and a thrill in that movie, and I didn't always feel that excitement in this one, though. I wish I did. I really wish that I sat there and felt excited watching this movie throughout, and there are some sequences where I did very much feel excited, you know, watching what was taking place, but I didn't feel excited throughout the whole of the movie. There was a couple of moments, well, I say a couple of moments, actually quite a few moments in the movie when I was watching and going, can we not speed this scene up? Because there's just two characters talking in a room, or a group of characters talking, and I get the point of the scene, but it feels like it's been going on for 5 minutes too long. And this was, I think, the first Mission Impossible movie where I've sat there going, get to the action sequence, get to the action sequence, because the thing is, this is where I view Mission Impossible movies. It's like cake, and for me, I mean, I eat a lot of cake, clearly, and the thing is, this is going to be a terrible metaphor, but I'm going to go ahead with it anyway. Yeah, right, cake for me, you know, Mission Impossible movies, right, I go there for the action, for the stunts. That's the cake. The plot and all the other stuff and great characters, that's like the icing for me. You know, I can enjoy a cake, but if it's not great, that's fine, you know. But the icing adds an extra something to it. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. You know, a Mission Impossible movie for me, the cake is the action, it's the stunts and everything, and the icing is the plot. And if the plot's great, then the movie's even better. Hopefully you understand what I mean. God tell you it's a terrible metaphor. But the point that I'm making is, I go to these movies for the action sequences, for the stunts, because it's Tom Cruise doing all of his own stunts. And you want to watch that, and there's this verisimilitude with the action sequences, and if you don't know what it is, verisimilitude, if you don't know what it is, look it up. But there's a verisimilitude in all the action sequences, which is breathtaking and really, really fantastic. And, you know, the plot, you know, all the intricacies and then having a really exciting, quite clever plot is like the icing on the cake. You know, it's not something I necessarily need with these movies because that's not what I'm going for. And if the plot's great, that's fine as well. That's, you know, it makes the movie even better, but that's not what I'm going to watch a Mission Impossible movie for. And in this film, I didn't find the plot and the storytelling that engaging. That is one of my big problems with this movie. I just didn't find the story that engaging. I didn't really get into the story that much. And maybe I need to rewatch it, because one of the reasons I didn't do a plot synopsis of this new Mission Impossible early on in this podcast is because I couldn't really explain to you what the plot was. And maybe that's just me being stupid. You know, maybe that's just me being stupid there and not really getting it. And maybe I do need to watch it again, but I do feel that there was a bit too much plot going on and not enough action, because I go to these Mission Impossible movies, I watch these Mission Impossible movies, and, you know, the reason I've got so much into the franchise is because of the insane action, and you get that in this movie, but just not enough. Just not quite enough as some of the other Mission Impossible films, which I have preferred in the past. And Hayley Atwell, she gives a really good performance in the film. I really liked what she was doing. Didn't love that character though. I didn't warm to that character. I wish that I did. And I didn't love what they did with Rebecca Ferguson. Rebecca Ferguson was, in my opinion, the best part of Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. She was amazing in that movie. And I really liked what they did with her Fallout. But in this film, it felt like they were like, oh, let's just get Rebecca Ferguson back, because we like her, and Tom likes her, and Sam Pegg likes her. You know, they all like working with her. Let's get her back in this film. What are we going to do with her? We're going to do this with her, but that might do this. And I'm not going to get into spoilers, but I didn't love what they did with that character. That's all I'm going to say. I wish we got more of her. And there's a lot of characters in this movie, and it doesn't feel messy. I'm not saying that it doesn't feel messy, but sometimes I feel like I wanted more of another character than the character we were focusing on. And I wasn't in love with the musical score as well by Lorne Balfe. I might be pronouncing his name wrong, I apologise if I am. It's very Hans Zimmer-esque. And there's some Hans Zimmer scores I love. I love Hans Zimmer's score to the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I love his score to the Simpsons movie, which no one really talks about, but I love that score. And yeah, Hans Zimmer's done some amazing scores in the past. His score for Man of Steel, great. But the thing is, there's some Hans Zimmer scores which I'm not too big on though, because they're just noise. Like his scores for Dune. They work well with the film, and if you take his score out of Dune, the film's very different. But if you just listen to that score by itself, there's no memorable, distinctive themes. You can't really pick out any themes there. Unlike John Williams' music, where John Williams is my favourite musical composer of all time for film, because you can sing all these themes and you know them. You can listen to John Williams' music outside of the movie and still get something out of it. You can do that with Hans Zimmer. I just don't think to the same degree. And the point I'm making is this score, Lorne Balfe's score for Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Long name again. It's just, if you listen to it by yourself, I don't think, if you listen to it, out of context of the movie, I don't know if you get much out of it. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if you get much out of it outside of the film. And it works well in the movie. It builds suspense. I do think if you take the score out of certain action sequences, it just wouldn't have the same intensity and the same breathtaking feel. But I wish that the score had more new memorable themes going on, like Michael Giacchino's scores for Mission Impossible 3 and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, or Danny Elfman's score for the first Mission Impossible movie, where there's distinctive themes going on and you can pinpoint them out, and the scores are intense and suspenseful and everything like you want them to be for Mission Impossible movie. But there's also something just in the scores in itself where you don't have to listen to the score and watch the movie at the same time, if you know what I mean. I think Lorne Balfe's score doesn't really work by itself out of context in the movie. So I do think it's a good score, it works well with the film, but it's a bit too Hans Zimmer-esque for my liking. And Hans Zimmer, in the same vein as he's working Dune or Dunkirk or Interstellar, where quite a lot of the time it's just noise, like it's just noise and it's building up, and that works in the context of the film, but put it this way, it's not a score I'm going to listen to on Spotify. And this Mission Impossible movie is pushing 3 hours long. And I know a lot of people have come out of this film and said, oh, didn't feel the length whatsoever. I did. Maybe that was just me again. Maybe I need to rewatch the film. Maybe I was doing up too much in my head, but I did feel the runtime a bit. And, I felt the runtime a bit when I rewatched Mission Impossible Fallout the other day, because that film is about 2 hours and a half as well. And Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, the one before that, that's about 2 hours 40 minutes. These films have been increasingly longer over time. But the thing is, I don't feel it as much with those previous two movies, with the previous two predecessors, because there's the constant movement. It's going back to the whole thing. I think this film needed a bit more acceleration for my liking, because there were so many dialogue sequences and so many moments where they explain the plot, and those moments are important, but it does, for me, slightly drag the runtime down. And I'm not saying I'll take much out, because I do think most of the film, I think it's all important. But I did start to feel the runtime, especially when it's pushing almost 3 hours, and you realise there's only a part 1. I mean, again, it feels very complete, but still in the back of my mind I'm going, it's only a part 1, remember? It's only a part 1, and part 2, it may even be longer. And I didn't feel that the mission was impossible in this movie. These films have the title Mission Impossible in them. And one thing they always do well, or the best ones do, is they make the mission feel impossible. I didn't feel the mission felt impossible when I was watching this film, until the climactic sequence involving the train. That's when I started to feel like the mission could be impossible for all these characters. The rest of the movie, I was like, oh, these guys are just going to go on the mission, because I know they can. And in the other Mission Impossible films, there's always that sense that the mission is impossible. Will they actually do it? Will they actually accomplish their mission? And they always just manage to, but there's just so much suspense and intensity and all of that sort of that you want from Mission Impossible film, and I just don't know if you get that. I mean, I didn't get that. You know, it's all subjective in the end, and I know a lot of people are really loving this movie, and I did really like it because, you know, there are so many moments where the acceleration hits in this film. What I mean by that is when the action sequences are just magnificent and you'll watch them in amazement. There's so many moments like that, and when this film does accelerate, it zooms, it sprints, you know, it just keeps going when it's at its highs. But it's not my favourite Mission Impossible movie because this has got a bit too much plot. And, you know, with these films, they deliver so much on their action. The best Mission Impossible films do anyway. There's some Mission Impossible movies, and I'll talk about this in a podcast I'm hopefully planning to do later this week, where I rank all the Mission Impossible films. But the best Mission Impossible movies, you know, they're just constantly moving. They don't stop, and there's this acceleration with them, which is just so riveting to watch. And there is that pace in this film, but I just wish it was there a bit more. And, you know, I just wanted more action from this movie. That's what I'm saying. And usually I'm not an action guy. I'm not somebody who is really into action movies loads. But there's something about the way Christopher McQuarrie directs action sequences in the Mission Impossible movies. And not just him, in some of the other Mission Impossible movies, which he didn't direct. But there's something about, you know, the directing in the latest Mission Impossible movies, in the action sequences, which is just so engaging visually. And I got that with this film, but I wish I felt the same way about the story. I think that's where I sit the film overall. I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. And if you want a good blockbuster to really remind you of how great blockbusters can be, I would recommend this movie. Although I don't think it's the best Mission Impossible film overall. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I really did. And I'm so glad I saw it in IMAX. And the train sequence at the end. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But that sequence alone, I think is perfect. Just that whole sequence. The editing, the directing, the way it's all shot, how real it feels. Like, I don't know if they actually did that. I really don't. But you think it's real in the film, and that's the point, though. You think it's real, and the stunts are, I mean, everything in this film is, all the action in this film is on another level. I just didn't feel the same way about the story and the storytelling, but that's just me. But I'm, again, really enjoyed it, really liked it, and it's a really good Mission Impossible film as well. I'd probably sit it in the middle of my ranking, but I'm going to do my ranking, like I said already, hopefully sometime later this week. But I'm going to say that Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, I'm going to say it's a 7.8 out of 10. Like I said, I know what I said before, but I just want to emphasise it again. You know, even so I've got my problems in the film, and even so I didn't love it, I did still really like it. And I'm glad I did, because otherwise it would have felt a bit like a waste of my time, you know, watching all the Mission Impossible movies leading up to this one. And going back to that whole cake metaphor, I'm not sure if it made sense before, but the thing is, you know, when I go to watch a Mission Impossible film, I go for the cake, and that for me is the action sequences, for the stunts. And the icing, the thing you just put on, you know, the icing is just the plot for me. And if the plot's good, then it makes the movie even better, and it can make the cake even better when you eat it. Hopefully you understand what the metaphor is there, and the point I'm making is, the thing, though, that I'm most looking forward to is the eating of the cake. The icing is just an extra layer of goodness. And that's what I most look for with Mission Impossible movie. The action. I know, you know, that's maybe not the best way to think about these movies, but come on. The action in these movies is incredible. And when it's at its best. I'm not even sure if I'm making sense anymore. But the point I'm making is, it is a great film. And the final train sequence, and I know what he spoke about it, I just want to say one more thing about it. It's something to behold. It really is. It is constantly that edge of your seat. You are gripping the edge of your seat. It's really it's intense film watching on another level, that whole train sequence. And it goes on for, like I said, about 40 minutes. You know, it's just amazing. And there's so many action sequences from which I really, really loved. And I also love seeing Kid Rich back. I think that's the name of the villain from the first film. I love seeing him back in this one. I didn't know if he'd come back in this franchise, but they brought him back in this movie, one thing I got to mention. And I love the way that Chris McCoy frames certain moments of this movie, his shot choices, the way he moves the camera, in just dialogue sequences I've already mentioned. It's a visually very engaging film. I just wish the story was more engaging. I wish I loved what they did with certain characters more, particularly Rebecca Ferguson's character. Didn't love what they did with her, although she's great in the film. Rebecca Ferguson, I don't think really is a foot wrong in anything she's in. Same with Hayley Atwell. Great performance, really like on-screen presence, but didn't love what they did with that character. I don't know, I didn't want these characters, but maybe I just need to watch it again. Maybe I just need to watch this film again. I don't understand what everyone's raving about, but at the moment, I really, really like this film. I did, but I didn't love it quite as much as some people are doing. But yeah, I definitely recommend it. And it's, as a title of this podcast today, an immense blockbuster that needed more acceleration. But it's still wildly enjoyable to watch. I didn't put that in the title, but I wanted to say it anyway. It's still wildly entertaining to watch. And for that reason, I'm going to say that Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is a 7.8 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that is it for today's podcast, for my podcast on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. God, that title's long. If you've seen the film, let me know your thoughts in it in the comment section below, and let me know your thoughts on my review of the film as well, because as I mentioned, feedback is much appreciated, and I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on this film as well. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 in the comments section below. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like, subscribe on this podcast. And look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. Thank you as always for watching, and I will see you guys again soon. But bye for now. Bye.